A new widget is going viral right now. The most downloaded app in the world isn't Instagram, and Zoom's back. All that and more in this week's episode, so stay tuned. Welcome to a new episode of This Week in Apps. I'm Ariel from Appfigures, and here are 5 things you need to know from the world of mobile apps and games. Last month, a widget took over the App Store seemingly overnight thanks to TikTok. Fast forward barely a month, and another widget is now at the top of the charts, again seemingly overnight. Note It is the name of the app, and it's a simple app that lets you draw on your iPhone, and for the drawing to appear in someone else's iPhone inside of a widget. It's a pretty novel idea that most people on TikTok labeled cute. It's also pretty similar to Lock It Widget, last month's viral success. Although the app has been around since the summer of 2021, it wasn't at all popular, getting just a handful of downloads. And that changed completely on January 22nd when the app started climbing the charts after having an explosive day with 27,000 downloads in one day for an unknown app. This week, those downloads grew by a factor of 10, adding more than 200,000 downloads every day in the last 12 days. Note It was downloaded a total of 1.2 million times from the App Store globally, according to our app intelligence. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but TikTok is full of videos showing off Note It. I'm going to let you draw the conclusion. Pun somewhat intended. One little thing I noticed is that the app's website is currently offline because it got too much traffic and its host suspended it. I think it's a huge missed opportunity, but it's also kind of weird because you can't read the privacy policy of the most downloaded app in the US App Store. Kind of a problem. Next up, Wordle, the mobile game, not the web sensation that's now owned by the New York Times. That game is sticking to the top of the charts for the second week in a row. Now, I've talked about it twice already, but both times I expected it to just drop off fairly quickly because it's not the game most people are looking for when they're looking for Wordle. It also looked pretty outdated. It was made in 2016 and got its last update in 2016 at the time when I was looking at it. But I was only half right. So instead of looking at downloads, which have already crossed 2.3 million, let's look at revenue. Before we jump into numbers, I just need to point out one little thing, and that is when I looked at it for the first time, it looked pretty outdated, but that has changed since, and now it doesn't look like 2016 anymore. It looks like any game you would have in 2022. So that's no longer a problem, and that shouldn't prevent people from paying, which is what my previous point was. But the more I think about this, the more I realize that not all people know what to expect when they hear Wordle. And that's the thing with word of mouth. They heard the name, they looked it up in the App Store, and they downloaded a game and they played it. And even though it's a totally different game, some people may not understand that at all. So they might think that's Wordle and they might be happy with it. And it's weird but interesting. So just keep that in mind. On to the numbers. Since jumping to the top of the charts, and also since the visual makeover, Wordle has seen revenue go vertical. It went from just a few $100s per day, even when it was popular, to more than $6,000 this Wednesday alone. And that's the highest day ever, according to our estimates. In total, the game earned about $31,000 since it's made its way into the top charts, according to our estimates. And yes, that's very low. It's teeny tiny. It's lower than low. It's exactly what I said a few weeks ago when I first looked at it. But that's for the obvious reason that it's not the Wordle game most people who download it are actually looking for. So they download, run it, and see it's not it, and they just delete it. No opportunity for revenue. But then there's another issue because let's say you do play the game, and the game is actually decent. I've played it a few times and I enjoyed it. There aren't many opportunities to pay the game. There's one option, it's an in-app purchase, to remove ads, and the ads are really annoying between levels. But those ads have never made me want to pay for the game, and that in-app purchase is not at all visible, so I just stop playing the game when that happens. I think that's a huge area for improvement, and that means there's a huge opportunity here. I hope the developer capitalizes on it. And next up, I have a treat for you. I crunched the numbers earlier this month, earlier than normal, to give you the most downloaded apps globally in January. And there are a few interesting areas to look at here. TikTok was the most downloaded app in the world in January, according to our app intelligence. And it took the lead back from Instagram, which was enjoying it for the last few months with 52 million downloads globally versus Instagram's 45. A little bit lower than last month, if you remember. Facebook, WhatsApp, and Telegram rounded out the top 5 most downloaded apps in the world in January. An opening set that matches previous months fairly well, I would say. And here's an interesting thing. Zoom is back after disappearing last month. Zoom's downloads grew for the first time since the explosion of 2020, and it made its way into 7th place overall, but more of that in a minute. Spotify and CapCut closed the top 10 most downloaded app list, and again, just like they did in December. Together, the top 10 earned 310 million downloads in January. It's a bit lower than December, but That's not surprising for a January. So let's talk about Zoom. Zoom clawed its way back into the most downloaded apps list in January, with downloads growing the most since the madness of 2020. Most is actually a bit misleading. I should say with downloads growing. Last December was Zoom's slowest month in nearly 2 years. It saw just 16 million new downloads globally. That isn't a small number, but it's a pretty small number when your peak was 93 million, and that was back in April of 2020. The trend was also sloping down, so month over month, they were getting fewer and fewer and fewer downloads, which makes sense. Between Zoom fatigue and dwindling need for remote communications among non-business users, a slowdown in downloads is kind of inevitable. But then January rolled around and downloads jumped to 25 million according to our estimates. Is Zoom fatigue declining? Are there businesses who set Zoom out and just can't do that anymore? Are more non-business users using it again? Probably. And last for this week, I crunched the numbers to give you the most downloaded games in January, as I promised a couple weeks ago, and this list is nothing like what I expected. Subway Surfers was the most downloaded game in January, adding 25 million new downloads to its user base. India and Brazil continued to be at the top of the list in January, but downloads came from a lot of countries. I wonder how we'll do when I analyze game revenue next week. Stay tuned for that. Roblox was right behind it, netting 16 million new downloads according to App Intelligence. January wasn't a great month for hyper casuals, likely due to a slowdown in ad spend after a busy December, but a few did manage to sneak in, although really at the bottom. Two of my personal favorites also made an appearance on this list. 8-Ball Pool snatched the number 10 position overall, and Among Us came in 10th in the App Store. Together, we estimate that the top 10 most downloaded games in the world were downloaded a total of 148 million times. And that's all I have for you this week. If you liked any of the insights in this episode, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and give me a like. That's how I know you like this. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments, and I'll see you next week.